think a lot of us who grew up watching Laurel and Hardy have wondered what they were like when the camera was not rolling. Would you like to share some reminiscences and insights into their off-screen personalities? It's on.
What they were like when we weren't shooting?
Yes.
Actually, they were very quiet and very serious. Nothing like they were on the screen. At least I felt that way. What about you?
Well, we had a pool on the set of Babes in Toyland, and Stan loved pushing people into it, if you call that quiet.
Well, ours was only a dance studio that he would knock the walls down in the film, but actually they were quite serious when, with me anyway. It's off the set, you know, it's serious. And that's about, I adore them. We can go on from there, but as you say, off the set. Anything else?
I'm always curious as to what degree of spontaneity in improvisation versus careful rehearsal was characteristic of the Laurel and Hardy.
Very little rehearsal, correct?
None.
None. And spontaneity, that's a nice word for ad-libbing and going along on, and just picking it up wherever they would throw a line, and you'd better have an answer. And how about you?
Well, I like to tell the story of my first day on the set. I was 21 years old. Mr. Roach had seen me in an old melodrama called The Drunkard, which was in its first year. It went on to play 26 and a half years. I was not in the full run, thank God. I only played the first 2¼ years. But I was in the right place at the right time, and that's exactly the performance that Mr. Roach wanted for old Barnaby in Babes in Toyland. So anyway, that's my story. The first day on the set, I was very much in awe of them, of course. We had about a 5- or 6-page scene. Well, Mr. Laurel had what we now call gophers. He had 4 or 5 of them. They were old vaudevillian friends of his, whom he had coaxed Mr. Roach into hiring. I guess a lot of actors who have to get buoyed up for a scene or something, some of them use pills, some of them use booze, but Stan used his gophers. They would tell jokes, he would tell jokes, they would die laughing no matter what he said. And by the time he got in front of the screen, he was up here, he was way up there in the air. So after about half an hour of these jokes, and I'm sitting there saying, my God, picture making is easy, all you do is sit around and tell jokes. He said, well, let's think about the scene. So he had the script, and he said, look, Ollie, when you do this, I'll do that, and let's cut that line. And Henry, when he does that, why, you do this, and I'll do that, and so on and so on. And they went right through the whole thing, throwing out about half of it. So I didn't know where I was coming in or what I was going to do, so I very stupidly said, oh, he said, okay, let's shoot it. And I said, aren't we going to rehearse?
No.
And he said, do you want to spoil it? I never made a suggestion like that again. In 12 weeks, I kept my mouth shut.
What year was Babes in Toyland?
Oh, it was 19... No, it was 34, I think, or 35, somewhere in there.
Well, you see, when I got to work with them, they were still doing the lively jokes. I didn't work with them until 40, I think it was 1943. So that they were a little more quiet on the set at that time. But I want to tell you something also of my first days, besides being very much in awe. The scene is a dancing masters, and it's a dance studio, and Ollie is in a tutu. You can imagine Ollie in a tutu. And so we're about ready to shoot, and you say, no rehearsal, you know. So we have to come running, and we hear a big crash, and Stan has gone through the wall or something with his tutu on. We have to come running to see what's happening. No rehearsal, but just before the camera starts, Ollie turns to me and says, now, darling, make sure you stay right up alongside of me, because, you know, if we come around there, they're not going to see you on that screen. If I get in back of him, then I'm out. So from that moment on, the very first scene, I fell in love with him. They were the sweetest, kindest, the gentlest, loving men I have ever worked with them. To this day, anyone asks me what I enjoyed the most, I say Laurel and Hardy.
Mr. Brandon, you actually since that was Babes in Toyland was a Roach production, can you give us a little bit of sense of Mr. Roach's involvement as a creative producer on that feature?
I don't remember ever seeing him on the set. If there were differences, which I understand there were between him and Mr. Laurel, they were all up in his office. He never intruded on the set. If he controlled things, he pulled strings somewhere else. He never superseded Stan or the director or anyone else. Ollie was easygoing. From what I heard, he never got into arguments. He just loved to work and do his thing and go out and play golf and so on. But Stan, he was contentious, but not on the set. Oh. But do you realize, I wonder if you all realize that Mr. Roach, is he 94 now?
No, 98.
98?
98.
You know, we have something called, what is it they call producers? It's a Hindu term, not poobah.
Mem Sahib?
No. Well, it'll come to me. The original producers in Hollywood, the guys who started this whole thing, they're all gone.
All gone.
Except for Hal Roach at 98. Should I go through them? I can run them off for you, studio by studio. It's like MGM, it was Louis B. Mayer and Thalberg, and over them was Nicholas Schenck in New York. At Fox, it was his brother Joseph Schenck, Winfield Sheehan, Darryl Zanuck, William Fox, and somebody else. Universal, it was Mr. Lemley, later his son. They're all gone. The three Warner brothers are gone. Columbia was Harry Cohn and his brother in New York, Al Cohn, was it? Jack Cohn, thank you. I can always get answers from them. They're not fans, they're, you know, aficionados. Where else? There were the Independents. Of course, the father of them all was D.W. Griffith. And there was Al Sennett on the comedy side. There was the Independents, Selznick, and Goldwyn. Whom have I forgotten? Paramount. Zucker, and Schulberg, and Jesse Lasky. All of those people are gone. Mr. Roach is the only one left. And I think that's pretty exciting. Now you may say, well, he wasn't one of the big ones. He didn't have one of the big studios. But he had something more precious than all that. He had a laugh factory. And you can talk to any actor I know, and he'll say the hardest thing is not to get the audience to cry, it's to make them laugh. And Mr. Roach and his people, Charlie Chase, who was so wonderful as a drunk at the convention, he did series of comedies. Velma Todd and Patsy Kelly did series. Our Gang Kids and later the Little Rascals. And of course, the toppers were Laurel and Hardy. They manufactured laughs. They were responsible for thousands and millions of hours of laughter.
The slow take, with Stan and Ollie slow take, that's when it first started.
Right.
Copied.
Right. And he's a living legend, and I hope he goes on living. I'm very proud to have worked with him. Here you are, I've talked long enough.
I didn't have the pleasure of knowing Mr. Roach, because I worked when he went, then the Laurel and Hardy went to his 20th century. But as you say, too, Ollie was so laid back, the two of them. I mean, there was no tension, nothing. It was absolutely, that's why when I worked with them, it was my first lead, I could be relaxed because they were so marvelous. And they were so nice to me, you know. I remember we were sitting on the set, into about a week, and they were nonchalant. We were sitting there, and he said, what do you really want to do? You know, what type of roles? And I said, well, I'd love to do comedy. And they said, Stan looks to Ollie, Ollie looks at Stan, and says, she wants to do comedy. So he says, okay, we'll give you a chance. I said, okay. So the first scene in the Dancing Masters, where they let me try it, was Stan has to go out a sliding door. I have to come in the sliding door. We have to time it so that it hits Stan in the rear end, you see. So I did it, and it was one take, which everything was in one take, right? I mean, there was no, but this was it. It was like stage. So anyway, after it was over, I did it fine, and Stan looked at Ollie looked at Stan and said, her name's One Take Marshall. And that was my name for the rest of the movie, and they let me do a few other things with them, and I don't think any other leading lady had ever done their actual routines with them as I did, which was really an honor. Such as the passing the plate routines and the different things and getting them all in Stan's arms. And all I can say, it was really something to remember. I just adored them.
Why don't we turn it over to the aficionados here and see if there are any questions in the audience. Yes?
I don't have a question. I just wanted to say that I think it's amazing that Mr. Brandon looks better and younger now than he did in Babes in Toyland.
Thank you so much, but I don't have a fright wig on. A lot of other goop on my face. When I walked into, Mr. Roach came to see the show, we'll say on a Saturday. On Monday, I was in his office. And I walked in, he said, who the hell are you? And I said, I'm Henry Kleinbach, which is my real name. And he said, you're not that old son of a bitch I saw on the stage Saturday. I said, yes, I am. Well, he was fooled by my makeup or whatever. And he said, my God, I don't know what we're going to do with you. He hired, I think, 4 makeup men. They weren't as advanced as they are today, you know, with all the stuff that they had. And thank God he finally found a wonderful old guy, an old Irishman named Jim Collins, who had been head of makeup at Paramount for years. And Jim used all sorts of wonderful things, like things that he'd worked with Lon Chaney, and Chaney taught him that a piece of solder wire, that the oxidation on that made a wonderful shadow. That in the theater we use usually a brown pencil to make a line. Well, that photographed like a brown pencil. But he used solder and made shade. And he put a little chin piece on, and the assistant director would say, no, Mr. Roach wants him just the way he's made up in the drunkard. And he said, I can't do anything about that young chin. And he sent to the prop department and got wire spectacles because my eyes were hard to me, and so on. So Jim got me the part. You know, I was forever grateful to him for that.
You look great.
Okay. Speaking of makeup, then, though, my daughter, I don't know if you all know, is Deborah Raffin. And she just finished doing a film my son-in-law produced called Night of the Foxes in Yugoslavia. And as good as the makeup men are, they hired the top makeup man who did Elephant Man. And they put some kind of makeup in the eyes that when they were taking it off late at night, unfortunately, she went blind for 3 days in Yugoslavia and had to be in a dark room for a week. So makeup has improved, but they're using things now maybe they shouldn't be using that are too dangerous.
Well, perestroika will take care of that.
Yes.
This is for Trudy. Much has been written about how Laurel and Hardy were unhappy at Fox. I wondered if you ever heard them verbalize that while you worked with them, or heard them talk about it with anyone while you were there with them.
No, I never did, but that might be why they were, as Henry saw them and as I saw them, as more quiet and not quite as exuberant as they were maybe with Hal Roach. I imagine they were just loved being over there. I imagine they had a lot more freedom. Fox was a larger studio and controlled more, and I'm sure they didn't like the control.
Any other thoughts, questions? Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to know if either of you can share some thoughts about their relationship with each other. They seem to be a rarity in that they're a comedy team that actually liked each other. And I was wondering if you can share.
Well, all I can say is that they were very fond of each other on the set.
Extremely.
I understand that they didn't socialize. They had different sets of friends. And that's probably one reason they stayed in business. They didn't get in trouble at parties and things.
But you could tell they respected one another.
Oh, yes.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Any other questions? Yes.
Question for Mr. Brandon. You also did Our Gang short. Do you have any stories about working with the Little Rascals?
Well, I think they wrote that because they knew that they could photograph me as a young man and then as an older man. And that was great fun. I had really not seen too many of those shorts. And I came away with such respect for those kids. They're showing quite a few of them now in Little Rascals, and They were incredibly talented, those kids. They could dance, they could sing, they could act. I had such respect for them.
Have you read Shirley Temple's new book that she's written?
No.
It tells you the insights quite a bit when she was a little girl, 2, 3, 4, and 5, what was going on in the sets and the way they were handled. It's a very interesting story.
I see quite a bit of Spanky, who ended up sort of as the star. We always said he'd grow up to be a dwarf. Well, he did. He's quite short. But he's very bright, and he's a lot of fun. He loves to tell the story about... I later worked with him in a picture called Babes in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. Nobody going to help me? Thank you, Trail of the Lonesome Pine, which they, the boys later used the song in one of their shows. He was a little devil, Spanky. I remember one day that the story got all over the lot that some lady with blue hair from Pasadena had leaned over and tousled his hair. I've never seen a child who likes its hair tousled. Have any of you? And she said, "Oh, you're the cutest little thing." And he said, "Oh, you old ladies give me a pain in the ass." That got all over the lot. I tell that story and he looks at me with wonderment. Of course, he has no memory of saying it. But at one of the early parties, why, I went up the bar and asked for a drink, and he made it for me, and then he handed it to me and he wouldn't let go of it. And I said, "Well, can I have the drink?" And he said, "You blew me up in the steam shovel in Trail of Lonesome Pine." He said, "I'm getting even. I just poisoned your drink." It's real fun, Spanky.
Any other questions? Yes.
Could you both comment on what Mr. Laurel's relationship was with the directors on each of the pictures you wrote?
As I say, there was not one little sound of anyone being discontented. The director sort of just went along with Val Sinclair, who loved doing comedy anyway. What a doll of a man. So, I mean, I was surrounded in my first leading role with them with such wonderful men. It was just a pleasure. I thought, this is great. This is the only way to work. So what would you say? Who was your directors?
Well, I got to the studio quite early on as they were preparing, and I met the man who was to direct the picture. He was a young man, he couldn't have been more than 30. His name was Ray McCary. He was Leo McCary's younger brother. And we got to talking and everything and comparing notes on what we thought about the part and so on, which was wonderful because you don't get those chances very often in pictures, and I didn't realize this. I thought this was the way it was always done. But we developed a wonderful relationship. He said, "Look, they don't really have a designer here. I'm just wondering what sort of a costume you'll get." And I said, "Well, I have a friend at the Pasadena Playhouse. It's where I got most of my training, named Corliss McGee, and he's very inventive. And do you want me to ask him to make some sketches?" And he said, "Would you do that?" So Corliss made some wonderful sketches, which were what I ended up with in the picture: the elongated hat, the long shoes with the large buckles, the jabot, the whole long coat, everything. And he didn't get a nickel for that, but he did it out of friendship. But we were on that basis. And then I hadn't been there for about a week, and I came up and knocked on his door, and somebody walked out, and I said, "Where's Ray?" He said, "He's no longer on the picture." Well, I was shocked and so on. So about 2 weeks after the picture was over, I got a call from Ray, and he said, "I'm a graduate of Loyola College, and they're playing a football game. Would you like to go to the game with me, and we can talk about the picture?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to." So he and Georgie Sherman, who was his assistant, then later became quite an important director, and I went to the game. And between their betting on everything that happened in the game, wild, crazy bets with a lot of money exchanged, he told me that he was in Mr. Roach's office, and Mr. Roach was sitting there with his head in his hands, and Stan was there, and Babe was there, and he was explaining how he wanted to play a scene. And he said, I didn't hear the door open, but I sensed that the door had opened. And he said, I had my hand out like this, in a rather broad gesture. And he said, Charlie Rogers, who ended up being co-director on the picture with Gus Mines, Charlie Rogers directed all of their scenes, and Gus Mines directed all the other scenes that they weren't in. And he said Charlie Rogers, who was one of the Gophers, we call them Gophers now, or Stooges, or whatever, and an old vaudevillian friend of Charlie was behind me, and he said, as I turned around, Charlie was holding his nose and going like this. So I said, I'm Irish, Henry, and he said, my hand just continued on around and hit him in the face and sent him, he said, ass over tea kettle. And Mr. Roach looked up and said, what's going on here? And I said, why don't you ask Charlie? And then we went on to something else. And then I was told that I would have to divide the picture with Charlie, and being Irish, I lost my temper and quit. He said, which cost me $12,000. I said, why? He said, if I'd stayed on, they would have fired me. Well, that was that story, anyway. Tales out of school.
Any other questions? Yes.
I have a specific question about Babes in Toyland. It's becoming possible to see that film complete, either mistitled or missing. It's always missing footage, and the complete version has never been made available to home video, and nor is the complete version ever shown on television. That's been the case for maybe decades. I was wondering what someone has to do to see that film as it was released.
I don't really know. There's a hand up there. Maybe he has
Hand
an
it
answer.
back of you there.
CBS Fox is releasing the complete video in the next few months. Babes in Toyland. They found it at a 35mm fine grain positive back east somewhere.
He
They're
played
using
on
the
television
video.
about 2
So
years
it'll
ago.
have all the missing scenes and the direct titles, the MGM line, and everything.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So that's terrific news. It looks as if we'll finally be able to see it.
Sometimes, as Henry said too, I saw it about 2 or 3 years ago. Around Christmas they play it.
Yeah, but it's March of the Wooden Soldiers.
It's all cut.
It's a different
Yeah.
cut. It
Ah.
has less footage.
Yeah.
They cut some of the poetry out. The scene where Felix Knight is singing in the caves,
Right. It's all
the dream scene or whatever it is. Those things were cut and they've been put back. There is a version that's supposed to be complete that the Sons of the Desert tent has here, but I don't know who has it.
Are there any representatives of the local Sons of the Desert here?
I'm the only one, I guess.
I belong to it.
No, we're here, but we don't know.
Pardon?
We're here, but I don't think any of us know.
Uh,
No, we don't know. We've seen it though. Didn't they show the longer version?
Yes, they did. Yeah.
Do you know if Alfalfa's song, Object of My Affections, was written for him, or was that a popular song before he sang it in The Little Rascals?
So which one?
Who sang it
The
in
Object
the,
of My Affections.
Who sang it in the Little-
Alfalfa.
I have no idea. I have no idea, I'm sorry.
Does anyone know who sang Honolulu Baby in Sons of the Desert?
He was very funny.
They cut the credits off. There were no credits at the end of the show, so you couldn't.
Do you know, Marvin, who that was who sang Honolulu Baby?
I'm not sure, Henry.
Marvin Page is the casting director. You probably heard of him.
He knows every film.
And a
every
major
person.
aficionado.
Right.
Are there any other questions? If not, I'd like to thank Henry Brandon and Trudy Marshall for taking the time to be with us.